Thanks for joining us at Right On Replicas, where we're proud to bring you the best scale model kit reviews on the planet. This review is brought to you in part by Rogers Hobby Center in Saginaw, Michigan, where the fun begins. This review covers the 1925 Ford Chopped Model T. It's a 125 scale kit from AMT, number 1167. Now this kit will build two complete cars with lots of options. Both the Chopped T and a stock version Roadster are in the box, but we're just going to review the Chopped T here. Now the kit has 153 parts molded in white, clear and transparent orange, and chrome-plated parts with Tampo printed soft vinyl white wall tires. It also comes with water slide decals and instructions. The kit's rated a skill level 2, but that might be a little light, as some of the assemblies are pretty delicate. Just a second, folks. Sounds like my new program director, Newt's got a question. Come on in here, Newt.
Yeah? Why are the windows orange? Is that even legal?
Well, that's what makes modeling so cool, Newt. Well, it might not be legal in the real world, but you can do anything you want when you build your own model. After World War II, the Model T was the perfect target for the servicemen who wanted to turn their old jalopies into hot rods. They're light and cheap, and they're very versatile. This mold was originally produced in 1960, and it's had at least a half a dozen release variations since then, but it's always been a favorite of modelers because it's got so many options and customizing possibilities.
Wow, that's almost as old as you are.
Yes, and I've got a little flash on the edges too. You could call us vintage classics. Say, you should probably get back in the studio room and watch some volume levels or something, right? Sheesh! I got to give him more work to do. But if you folks have a question, please send it in. Now, on with the review. Obviously, with molds that are that old, you're going to find some fit issues and some flash, and maybe some other common issues to the kits and molding technology of the time. The one thing is, though, the instructions are not real clear. They're probably the original, and that's why we're here. If you follow us along, we'll show you how to build it successfully. When you're done with the kit, the finished dimensions will be about 5 3/4 inches long, 2 3/4 inches wide, and 2 inches high. Here are the contents of the kit. As you can see, there's a lot of pieces, along with the detailed wheels and tires, and some nice chrome option parts too. Remember, when you're using any of the products that you see or hear used in the review, to follow the manufacturer's safety and use instructions. And also remember to scrape off any chrome or paint, for that matter, for good adhesion. We'll be mostly using liquid cement and sometimes super glue for strength, occasionally a white type of glue for the windows. Here are the decals for the kit. Some of the larger ones may require some setting solution to nestle into the contours of the model, but as you can see, they're pretty colorful and the register is good. So you shouldn't have too much problem with these, and there's plenty of options to suit your taste. Construction starts with the engine, and this big V8 goes together pretty well, but you'll have to make a choice of some options here. But first, cement the engine halves to each other, and then paint the engine your desired color. I went with some orange to kind of match the rest of the theme on the car. Now glue on the oil pan to the block, and next paint the head and intake piece some aluminum color and cement that to the block too. Now put the valve covers in place and the gear shifter, and choose which engine you want to go with from here. And I went with a competition version, so I used the Magneto, that's part 305, glued that into place. Then you can paint the side draft carbs gold and cement them to the blower and install them into the intake. And you can then glue the carb hats on at this point. But there's also some velocity stacks available on the chrome tree So I decided to use those instead of the halves. Next, we'll add a little detailing to the blower belt by painting the belt flat black and the pulleys aluminum. Then you can cement it to the front of the engine. Now, I noticed here, like in the blue circle, you'll see there's a gap between the top blower pulley and the blower itself. So I cut a piece of chrome sprue tree and sanded it to fit in between the two parts for a more realistic look. I also added an aftermarket pre-wired distributor cap to the magneto. Next, we'll work with the frame, and we're going to paint that flat black with a couple of coats, and then we're going to scrape the paint where the engine goes into place and then locate that on the mounts into the frame. Look for these pieces in the kit. Next, we're going to install and assemble the front end. Begin by gluing the front axle, that's part 321, to the spring, and install both the left and right radius rods around the axle. Now these spread apart and they just wrap around the axle with the larger portion facing upwards. Now glue the other end to the frame. Cement the tie rod to the backing plates of the axle, and then assemble the front wheels and tires now, and glue them to the medium length metal axle to one of the wheels. So after this, I had done a test fit, and I realized that the axle seemed to be about 1/4 of an inch long. So I trimmed it off, and you can do that with nippers or a file or a grinder. Just be careful. Insert the metal axle assembly through the front axle and spring combination, and then the radius rods, and glue the other wheel on the other side. But be careful not to put too much pressure to break the parts. Similarly, we're going to use these parts to assemble the back end. And first we're going to cement the rear axle housings, those are parts 52, to the torque tube and the rear axle center section. Then assemble the rear tires and wheels. And I gave my tread a little more tread area, a little more of a sanding to make them look a little bit used. Now glue the long metal axle to one of the wheels, and just like the front, the axle seemed to be about 1/4 inch long, so I trimmed it off a bit. Now slip the rear left radius rod on the metal axle and insert the assembly through the rear end section that we'd built earlier. Now add the right radius rod and the other wheel to complete the rear axle assembly. But note that make sure the radius rod and the center section are below the metal axle. Once again, make sure that you scrape any paint or chrome plating to get a good bond on these parts, and glue the rear spring, that's number 318, into the slots of the rear radius rods, making sure they're seated all the way forward so there's enough room left to fit the rear shocks in the same slot. Now install the rear axle assembly into the frame by inserting the torque tube into the transmission and the pins on the radius rods into the front radius rod brackets. Next, glue the rear shocks, those are parts 319, to the slots that we had mentioned just before. Our assembly is rolling right along now. In fact, we have a rolling chassis on which to build the rest of the car. So hunt up these parts and we'll start working on the interior and a few of the chrome accessories parts there. Assemble the fuel cell and scrape off the chrome where this will attach to the floorboards later. In my sample, the steering wheel was warped and broken, so I decided to replace it with something out of my parts stash. I stayed with the orange color scheme and painted the floorboard and the seats and also the dash panel with some orange, and then I installed the steering wheel and the fuel cell along with chrome accessory pieces and the roll bar. Next we'll be working on the body, and it does have quite a bit of mold lines and some flash that you'll have to clean up. The hobby knife and sanding sticks will pretty much take care of that. And then I gave it a few coats of flat black and added some decals, including the orange roof decal. You may need some setting solution here just to make sure it sticks. But then I put on 2 coats of clear flat to seal the decals in place, And then I chose the orange glass. You can use the clear. And I used a hobby knife to separate the front and rear sections along the pre-cut lines, and with some white glue I installed them into the body. Now assemble the instrument panel by gluing the insert, that's 317, to the panel, and then cement that into the body just below the front glass. Glue the pedal assembly to the firewall and cement this to the body. And now carefully spread the body and slip the floor pan into it. Now this is a very tight fit, so go very slowly and be careful. Just kind of squeeze it in there. Next we're going to grab these pieces, the headers, the rod there, steering link, and the radiator shell, etc. And the instructions are a little hazy here. They don't mention the headlights or the radiator being installed, but they show the radiator shell being installed. So once again, clean off the chrome, and we'll start with the radiator. So paint that black and glue it into the shell, and glue this then to the frame on the front of the motor. Now you can install the rear push bars to the rear body, but I went for a cleaner look and decided not to use them. Cement the drag link, that's part 300, to the top left backing plate and side of the body. And I found this kind of difficult to install, especially on the finished body. So I drilled a small hole the same size as the drag link to help locate it. Now glue on the headers to the engine, and finally you can mount the optional spotlights to any location you desire, but I chose not to use those too. You'll have a few pieces left over, and quite a few of the decals, if you don't use them, to help construct the next model in the kit's box. Well, there you have it. Your kit is complete, and it's a little touchy on some of the areas, and the instructions are a little sketchy. But if you follow along with our step-by-step review, you shouldn't have any issues putting it together. And when you do, your patience will be rewarded by a really nice looking chopped rod. You could turn this, as it is in this show here, kind of a rat rod. You could ugly it up the way some of the rat rodders do, but those great looking wheels and tires, and even just one little touch of adding wires to your engine really make this thing stand out. It's an old kit. It's got some issues, it's an old mold, but by golly, it's just a fun build, especially with things like orange glass. So if I were you, I'd buy one and put it on my shelf. Well, we hope you liked this step-by-step premium scale model kit review. So that you don't miss any more, please subscribe to our YouTube channel by clicking on the icon in the lower right hand of any of our reviews. But you could also find us on Facebook and our website, rightonreplicas.com. Thanks!